The world has changed and is constantly changing. And it's interesting to take a look at the evolution of strategic planning and strategic decision making through the lens of the Cynefin framework to see what we can learn from this short exercise. The Cynefin framework basically breaks decision making into four different environments. One is an environment that's called obvious. It's where we look at the data, and realistically, if we put the right data into an Excel spreadsheet or into any design program, then the right decision will come out of that simple calculation. So even if we want to manufacture a car, if we know what the raw materials are, if we design the production and assembly plant exactly to specification, a high quality car will come out at the end of that production line. The answer is basically in the information, the analysis, the design, the calculations. Anybody who looks at that with a certain amount of background knowledge in the area can know how to design that given production line. In what we call the complicated environment, it's slightly more complicated in the sense that we don't know in short term, time-wise, or even geographically, whether any decision we make is actually the right one. For example, what Elon Musk is experimenting with SpaceX at the moment, sending rockets into space, they're going off the latest available data, but they're never quite sure whether that rocket is going to be a successful launch and re-entry. So, and that's what we've seen over the course of the last few tries at this exercise. Some of those rockets have exploded, and to date, they're still working on refining the design process in order to produce a rocket which is dependable to fly up into space and come back. There, data gives us insights. It doesn't give us the answer, but it gives us insights as to what we should do. In a complex world, it's a little bit more complex than complicated. Here, we can read all the books we want and watch all the YouTube videos and listen to our parents and counselors' advice on to how to raise a child. But whether that child grows up to be a delinquent or a doctorate student, or maybe both, then it isn't for sure that if we follow all the recommendations, that child will grow up to be a commendable member of society. And hence, we just, by looking at the data, by looking at the information, by looking at the recommendations, we can increase the level of probability or plausibility that a child is going to grow up to be a healthy citizen, but it's not guaranteed, and we'll never know for years to come. The final quadrant in the Cynefin framework is chaos, which is the equivalent of walking into a hospital in Ukraine at 8 o'clock in the morning, and realistically, the data that we could have gathered last night or even this morning isn't going to tell us whether we're going to have electricity, whether we're going to have supplies of medicines, and what kind of casualties we will be dealing with. We're really talking about real-time decisioning. And in that environment, data purely gives us a sense of security. We feel better by having analyzed and prepared, but the reality is we've just got to be fully present and take the best decision we can possibly do in that hospital when we get there in the morning. So Cynefin says there's four different types of environments for decision making and strategic planning. And if you look at over the course of my career, which has been over the last 30, 35 years, strategic planning and decision making has moved, in a sense, around this framework. From a time when I started, a lot of the strategic planning, the analysis, the SWOT analysis, all those kind of things, if we did that well, we'd get the answer to what should be in our strategic plan, and we could probably rely on that for the next 3 to 5 years. Over the course of my career, and for sure today, when doing strategic planning and decision making, if we're still relying on analysis of the data to give us the answer, we're probably producing very poor strategic plans and poor decisions. Because now we're operating up in the complex, complicated environment where data might give us some insights. It helps us take decisions, but ultimately it's all about getting a group of people together, doing scenarios, coming up with assumptions, seeing what emerges in our strategic planning, which will be based on the data, but it's not driven by the data. The data does not give us the answer. It's what we do with that, how we play with that, how we manipulate it, that's going to determine whether we come up with a good strategic plan or not. And any decision we take is also going to have to be a little bit more agile. We're going to have to be ready to change it at any given moment because the world is complicated or complex and is constantly changing. The classic VUCA world, if you like. And I believe now we're on the verge of a new frontier where many organizations, many teams, many decisions are now taken in an environment which is almost bordering on the chaos quadrant of the Cynefin framework. Relying on the data purely makes us feel better. What we really have to do is completely revamp our strategic planning process, our strategic decision-making process, so we do have the best decision possible. But it's how we play, how we interpret, how we build assumptions on that data in a group environment, allowing something new to emerge, which is going to determine whether we take the right decision or not. And then once again, we've got to be building agility, flexibility, strategic rigor, strategic flexibility into any of the outcomes we come up with. So my question I throw out to you is, are you still doing the strategic planning exercise and taking strategic decisions as though we can still assume that we are operating in the obvious quadrant of the Cynefin framework, that the analysis, that the models will give you an answer. And if you only use them well, an ideal, the best solution will come up. Because if you are, you're probably leading your organization and your team down a very dangerous cul-de-sac. We need to be decisioning, we need to be planning, we need to be making strategic decisions, assuming that we're on that border between chaos, complexity, and a complicated world where the old rules and old ways of taking decisions simply no longer apply.